Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. In this final part of our review of the Psycho franchise, we're taking a look at Psycho 4: The Beginning, which I don't think the title completely tells the truth, as it's actually a direct continuation of 2 and 3 with its own present-day story, but provides a lot of context and backstory for the events of not only the first one, but the second one and the third one. And yeah, so I would have just called it Psycho 4, but it is what it is. Starring in this one is, of course, Anthony Perkins as Norman, which I've absolutely got to commend him for because he committed to this role across 4 movies in over 30 years. As some going, and yeah, I just think he should be appreciated for that. Also starring in this is Olivia Hussey, who is most famous for being the final girl in the original Black Christmas movie, which is also a must-watch if you haven't seen it. And to finish the list off, we have CCH Pounder, who you'll definitely recognize from an enormous amount of TV shows. She plays the radio host interviewing Norman throughout the movie. This movie came out in 1990, so around 4 years after Psycho 3 came out, meaning that in the space of around 7 years, we got 3 Psycho movies during the early 80s to early 90s. And really, when you think about it, that's kind of weird, considering there were 23 years between the first movie and the second movie. But I've definitely enjoyed these sequels, each in their own way, to an extent. And for me, they are a great addition to my collection. So what happens in this one then? Well, this movie begins with a radio show host introducing and explaining the topic of the night, which is about sons who kill their mothers. With her are 3 men, one who is a mother killer, his granddad, who seems to think his dead daughter deserved it, which was a bit bizarre, and the author of a book about his experiences with mother killers. The mother killer and his granddad quickly fall off the scene plot-wise, but the author is fairly important, I would say, to the beginning to middle part of the movie, as it turns out his first experience with a mother killer was actually Norman Bates. As the discussions go on about why and how these killings come about, there's a call in from the phone line by a man who goes by the name Ed. We, as the viewer, are shown that this is actually Norman Bates calling from his house, who wishes to give some insight into the mentality of these mother killers since he's one himself. He reveals early on during the conversations that he's killed before and he's going to have to kill again, providing a little bit of a shock for both us as the viewer and obviously the hosts themselves. And then he goes on to talk about his first kill being a girl who wanted to have sex with him, who he was told to kill by a mother. Much of this movie's context is told through flashbacks, and our first one happens to be the night of this first killing, when Norman is flirted with by a pretty girl who manages to talk her way into his bedroom, undressing and getting into his bed. He is enjoying this initially, until he thinks he hears something from Mother's room. We see here that he's grappling with his personality disorder from a young age, where he's talking to his mother's body, fighting her on her decision to kill this girl. The girl gets tired waiting for Norman and ends up sneaking into Mother's bedroom, not realizing that Norman has gone to dress up as Mother. She gets a shot from behind when obviously he appears, and he stabs her like a ridiculous amount of times, ending up killing her. Back in the present, Norman gets irritated by the author, who's like pressuring him to give more insight and whatnot, and he ends the call, at which point we discover that Norman is now married and has a wife who works in the institute of which he was sent to. She mentions having good news for him, and once he's done with the phone call, he turns back to on the radio and he hears the host calling out to him, trying to get him to call back. He ends up calling back and he's asked by the host if his mother was the reason he became what he is, as well as the author demanding he provide more insight to what's going on in his head. Norman describes his mother as sweet one minute and mean the next, but calls her his best friend. At this point, we get some brief flashbacks mentioning his father dying from bees, and then an old woman knocks on his door in the present, revealing that it's actually Norman's birthday. There's another flashback to a picnic with a young Norman, showing a great love between Norman and his mother, which is key to the whole dynamic that I think carries the entire franchise. He speaks to the host, mentioning he killed his mother's boyfriend as well, because she didn't need him when she had Norman. There's more flashbacks showing an unhealthy physical relationship between him and his mother, where she has him cuddle her with barely any clothes on when he's a teenager. Finding a porn mag in his room, she scolds him and punishes him for it, leading to another flashback a little bit later on, where she makes him dress up as a girl with makeup on, locks him in a closet, demanding he go to the toilet like a girl would. This is a key part of the trauma that would shape Norman's character in both the original movie and the sequels going forward. So it is actually nice to see some of this fleshed out and explained in a greater detail. At this point, the authors realise that the person on the end of the phone call is Norman, and he tells the radio host and the producers that any threats he's made about killing anyone, he's got to be taken seriously, and if they don't, it's at their own peril and their own ignorance. He then gets ushered out of the studio, and that's the last we see of him. We get another flashback where Mother takes her anger out on Norman because another road is being built which is going to harm the motel business. Another key moment, I believe, as it reinforces that duality of being loving but also abusive to Norman that would later haunt him and just make him so unstable later on in his life. For much of the rest of the movie, we get a strong focus on the mother and her new boyfriend and their relationship, and how that escalating romance between them just infuriates Norman to the point where he decides that out of jealousy he's going to poison both of them. There's also a few more flashbacks showing how he pursued an older woman in an attempt to have like a mother figure, but the aggression of his mother personality lead him to murdering and dumping her in the river. Towards the end of the movie, we see just how Norman poisoned and killed his mother and her boyfriend. He does this by pouring poison into their drinks, and eventually, after a lot of fights and scuffling around, he finishes the job in the basement. Manages to steal his mother's body from the morgue. Not sure what happens to the boyfriend, that's not really mentioned, but he manages to steal the mother's body from the morgue before the funeral by weighing the coffin down with books and preserving her body using taxidermy, and that's obviously how she exists in the house for so long without decaying away. The final part of the movie deals with the fact that his wife has lied to him about birth control, and she's gotten herself pregnant against his wishes, as he believes he will create another killer if he has a child, and his bloodline should end with him. He tells the radio host that he's going to have to kill his wife because of this, and ends the call. He calls his wife and he tells her to meet him at the motel and house, where he confronts her. There's a bit of a scuffle. She runs away from him because he pulls out a knife, at which point he's trying to find her. They end up in the basement, where she reaches out to him saying he's not the man he used to be. He needs to trust that, he needs to trust her, and he can be a good father. He decides to believe her, drops the knife, and they have a happy ever after hug. He decides to burn down the house once and for all to get rid of the memories. This almost kills him because as he's doing that, he's confronted by all the memories and the killings that have gone on in the house. And we finish the movie with the firefighters at the house and him and his wife walking off. I had actually recorded something before I was going to do this, but I just wanted to mention that there is like a major continuity issue between this movie and the third movie. I've just gone back to YouTube to actually make sure that I heard this correctly and I hadn't messed up along the way. But definitely the reporter in the third movie, she does reference right at the end when she's doing her grand reveal that the sister, Norman's aunt, killed the mother.
Mrs. Full was your aunt, Norman. She was in love with your father, but your mother stole him away from her! Mrs. Full killed your father in a jealous rage and kidnapped you when you were just a baby! She killed your father because she thought you were a child!
Obviously, in this movie, we clearly see that Norman killed the mother and the boyfriend. So between Psycho 3 and this one, there is quite a big continuity error in that. I just thought I would address that. I personally think that the way it's handled in Psycho 4 is much more beneficial to Norman's character than having some random side character that only appeared for maybe 10 minutes most in the franchise be the killer of the mother. I don't think it worked, and I think I mentioned that in Psycho 3. I've had it for detracted away from the character, so I much prefer that they rectified that in this one. But as you're watching 2, 3, and 4 in close proximity, it was a big issue for me. I like to have things that make sense, and it didn't make sense to me. So I thought I would just address that. Right then, back to original programming. So overall, what do I think of this movie? I actually really enjoyed most of this movie. I think the present day plot with wanting to kill his wife because she's pregnant, a little bit dramatic, but I could also see why his character would want to do that, fearing that he would create another monster. And to be honest, at this point, reviewing it in 2023, it's quite a cliche trope at this point. The things that make me really appreciate this movie are the added backstory for Norman and his mother, showing us the relationship that they had that led to the events of 1, 2, and 3. It's not necessarily needed, as there's enough information in those movies through exposition that you can build the idea yourself. But I think being the fourth movie in the franchise, it does a good job of providing additional value rather than just being a seeming cash grab. Henry Thomas plays a good young Norman, and Olivia Hussey, I think, does a very good job playing the mother. She shows both endearing love and is quite good at showing those fits of rage which would be so detrimental to Norman's character, as he grew older. So yeah, that comes across quite well, all things considered. CCH Pounder as the radio host, she's serviceable. She doesn't really have much to do, in fairness. And the rest of the cast, nothing special, but they do their job without any real concern. Having watched and been a fan of the TV show Bates Motel when it aired, I can see so much of that show in this movie. A lot of the plot lines throughout that show are hinted at or shown briefly in this movie. For example, the highway alternative road being built, which absolutely cripples the income of the motel that's mentioned in the show. Also, the mother falling for another man, which infuriates Norman and is the reason for her being killed. That's directly in the show. That's pretty much how the show ends. And like I say, I just think this movie definitely enriches the whole Psycho franchise much more than it's probably given credit for. Since it was only a TV movie, maybe not a lot of people saw it. I think it's much, much better than Psycho 2. And if it was me in like an alternate world, I would probably make Psycho 3 into Psycho 2 and have this one be Psycho 3. I'd get rid of Psycho 2 altogether and I'd just have the trilogy, as I really don't think Psycho 2 adds that much value to the franchise. Like, now I've seen all three of the sequels. So on that note, how would I rate it? I'd probably give it a 3 out of 5. It's a slightly lower rating than Psycho 3, simply because I wasn't overly a fan of like the present day pregnant wife storyline, and I was much more interested in the flashbacks. But yeah, still a very good film. Like if you wanted to learn more and have more of the Norman character, like it's definitely worth watching. So I hope you've enjoyed this little mini series looking at the Psycho sequels. Please give me a like and a comment, maybe even a subscribe if you're feeling generous, and I'll see you in the next one.